Hello and welcome to Throughline Thursday with me. I'm your host, Gaurav Rastogi. And today we have our very fascinating guest, Mainak Dhar. Let me tell you first about Throughline Thursday itself. Throughline Thursday, every Throughline, we invite fascinating guests and have a conversation, a deep look into people's personal careers, their journeys, their highs and lows, and really reflecting on their careers. A sort of look that we don't normally get when looking at standard interviews and so on. So it's often a very fun and intimate conversation. When we meet people, especially now, a key challenge that people are running into is that they're having to reinvent themselves, and that brings them to the question of their own personal brand and reinventing, refreshing their personal brand. And it's a topic many people are confused about and don't know how to begin. Today's guest is an expert on that subject, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. Now, Throughline Thursday is run by Bay1. Bay1 is a company that helps large companies compete like a startup. And so reinvention is part of what Bay1 does as well. All right, so let me introduce you to today's guest and welcome him. Welcome, Mainak. Let me tell you a little bit more about Mainak. First thing first, Mainak is a good friend and a classmate from B School way back when. He and I went to the Indian Institute of Management in Ahmedabad many, many years ago. You can read the number on the screen. Since then, Mainak has worked at really fascinating brand companies like Procter& and Gamble, General Mills, and he's now CEO for India and South Asia at Kimberly-Clark. But that's not the only reason he's here. In addition to being a cubicle dweller by day, he's also a writer by night. And boy, does he write. Mainak has written, he's a best-selling author with more than 20 books to his credit and in a wide range of genres. Zombie fiction, branding books, and so on. What caught my attention was his latest book on Brand New Start, which is a book on personal branding, which really comes out of Mainak's experiences from helping people just out of the goodness of his heart at the beginning of COVID. Remember those good old days. So Mainak, welcome to Throughline, and I'm really glad you're here.
Thank you so much, Gaurav. It's wonderful to be here and wonderful to reconnect with you.
Yeah. So to begin with, tell us about your Throughline. What is Brand Mainak and how has it evolved over the years?
Well, I guess for me, like most people, I never thought of myself as a brand. But if I think of the few things that have made me tick and have been core to who I am ever since I was a kid, I'd say there are a couple of threads. One, I'm passionate about connecting with people through stories and ideas. Ever since I was a kid, I loved making up stories. I loved creating stories to connect with people. Second, I love building stuff. And, that started with pure creativity, but even as that's translated into my career, whether it's building brands, whether it's building teams, whether it's building organizations, I'm somebody who inherently gets joy in building. And I'd say the third thing that I've discovered about myself over the years is I really love applying those to make a positive impact to people around me. So if you were to ask me, what makes me tick, it's a combination of these things, using the things that I am passionate about and really trying to be the best I can for people around me, starting with being the best possible husband and father, making the best possible impact to people who are with me at work, and gradually, expanding that sphere of service to say how many other people could I help in any way I can.
Mainak, you may not remember this, but 10 years ago when I was writing my first book and I let the network know that, the Institute people know that this is what I'm doing, you were the first guy to reach out to me to offer help, which is so kind of you because you'd written, you'd published, and you said, look, God, if you need help, here I can help you with the whole process. And so that was really nice of you. And that was a good, it was not just good sort of feeling of camaraderie, but also a good feeling of support that there's someone out there looking out for you. So thanks for that.
No, thanks. And Gaurav, I think especially in the times we're living in, each one of us needs to pay it forward in whatever way we can. And, that's something that's, I think, core to who I am, what I believe, the kind of values I hope to pass on to my son as well.
Yeah. And speaking of your family, I've been following you on social media. We haven't really been in touch one on one. And I noticed you're a black belt now in karate.
I am, and that goes back a bit to what you talked about reinventing yourself. And I think the core of reinventing yourself is realizing that it's never too late to lose touch with your passion. So I used to learn karate back when I was in college, got to a brown belt, and then I lost touch, over the years with work and so on. And when we moved back to Mumbai in 2014, we were just passing a club near our house, and our son, who was just 6 or 7 at the time, said, "Daddy, you used to learn karate." He saw a poster there, and I said, "Yeah." And then he said, "Why did you stop learning?" And I realized there was no good answer. And I said, "Yeah, I just kind of lost touch." He said, "I'd like to learn." And so we went to the class, and then I ended up joining class with him. So I've been a student with my son in the same class for the last 6 years, which has been a fascinating experience.
And he has a book out as well.
He has. He wrote his first book a couple of years ago, which was fiction. He recently wrote an interesting book, which is a biography of great people who have risen from humble beginnings to actually raise money for charity. So in some ways, he's turning out to be a chip of the old block. My wife would say in many other ways, I hope he doesn't turn out to be a chip of the old block.
Congratulations to him. And boy, does that raise the standard for the rest of us. That's amazing. What got you to writing Brand New Start?
But to be absolutely honest, I don't read a lot of self-help or management books. So, as you can see, I'm sitting in my study. I love reading. I have all kinds of books, but that's one genre I've never really gotten into. Primarily because I find a lot of books which are, quote unquote, in the self-help genre are really trying to offer solutions when every one of us is unique. Every one of us has our own challenges. It's very difficult to kind of offer a template and say, do this and you're sorted. What got me interested really was in the early days of the lockdown. So I'm in Mumbai since last March. We've all been locked down, and maybe sometime in end March or early April of 2020, I had started hearing about people losing jobs. And what was really disturbing for me was, even young kids, people from the institute we were from or from other business schools started putting out on LinkedIn that the offers they got were being rescinded. So I imagine, my God, that's terrible. I mean, I imagine when we were in our early 20s, just starting out our lives, imagine how crushing it is to work that hard, think you're
Hmm.
beginning your career, and all of a sudden you realize you don't have a job. And I said, look, let me see if I can help some of these people out. So I just put out a post on LinkedIn saying, look, if anybody needs help with your career, advice, resume, just let me know. And I was surprised within a couple of weeks, almost 30 young people had reached out, largely young people without networks or mentors. And I began chatting with them one on one, helping somebody with a resume, helping somebody prepare for an interview, helping somebody think through, option A or option B. And as I was chatting with them, I realized there were many common threads. And it was as if a light bulb went off in my head. At that point, I was writing a thriller. And we were talking about branding, and I think the core of branding is really understanding what your purpose is. And that was kind of a wake up moment for me. I said, look, in the world we're living in, is one more thriller really what people need? So I shelved that thriller and I said, look, wouldn't it be more interesting if some of these ideas and insights that I was sharing with these young people, if I could get that out to more people? And that's what really motivated me to write Brand New Start and get it out there.
That's an amazing story. That's an amazing. Do you write emails and then decide to collate them into another book because you're so prolific?
No, I mean, it's very difficult to say where ideas come from. But I am a person who does not follow a set template or master plan. I'm largely, and it's at life, it's at work, and it's with my writing. I'm really driven by what I'm passionate about and what I'm curious about. So when I come across a theme that strikes a chord where I feel I'd want to contribute to the conversation or share something, that's what really gets me going in terms of what I want to write next.
Now you've written books on branding. Of course, you're an expert in branding. That's what your career has been about. What were some of the interesting things when applying branding ideas to the idea of a personal brand?
Well, I'd say the very first thing is when people think of a personal brand, especially as I was chatting with a lot of people, is people misconstrue personal brand as really being all about, networking, selling yourself. It's the superficial stuff you put out there, which, if you think of what a brand is not what
Mm,
it's all about. You don't define a brand by its packaging
mm,
or its advertising. Those are all things that make up a brand. And I think what people miss about branding, which can really be powerful when you apply that to your personal branding, is the strongest brands actually start with a very deeply felt sense of purpose. And if you think of iconic brands out there, Nike, Apple, Apple's not just about I'm going to sell you the latest smartphone. They're about reinventing categories. They're about really being driven by design, making things easier to use. Or about Nike, the first Nike ad wasn't about I'm selling you the greatest pair of shoes. It was about really understanding runners and their psyche. And I think that's an important thing that people sometimes forget, that it's not about what you show outside. It starts with a deep introspection and look inside and then being authentic to it. I think the second thing people miss is the strongest brands are driven by a strong sense of service. So a lot of people are hesitant about personal branding because, no, I don't want to project myself. It's not about projecting yourself. The strongest brands are being authentic, using your strengths to serve others. And
mm.
through that, you create imagery, you create associations, you create equity. And I think that's the biggest thing I found for a lot of people. Personal branding is how do you speak, how do you dress, what degree do you have? Those are a part of the puzzle, but that isn't the totality or indeed the core of what your personal brand is.
Hmm. Fascinating, fascinating. Now, do people, since you've written the book and you're doing a very, really interesting daily series on Instagram and Twitter and LinkedIn, so it's amazing to see your videos. Do you get pushback from people about the idea of applying personal branding? What are the sort of things that you hear?
No, to be honest, it's less pushback. I think it's more just reality because, as I said, um, I don't claim to be an expert on anything. And, ultimately, I think the any good book or any good coach or honestly any good conversation with a friend is less about seeking answers. It's more about being provoked with questions.
Hmm.
That's it. So I don't claim to offer the right answers to anything. And I think a lot of the questions that people come back with are their own specific context. So, one common thing that I get back from people is, well, you're asking me to be authentic and you're asking me to be true to me. I'm in an environment where conformity is valued,
Hmm.
or I'm in a really hierarchical place where I'm expected to show up in a certain way. So how do I square that? So that's a common thing that I get from people. The second thing that I get back is people often compartmentalize their
Hmm.
personal and professional lives. So people tend to have very univariate discussions. So when you talk of personal branding, a lot of people's conversations are all about careers. What job should I do? But they almost ignore or compartmentalize all the other things going on in their lives. And that's an important conversation I sometimes have with people is your brand is not one part of your life. It's the totality. The more you understand it, the more you understand what drives you as a person and you
Hmm.
bring that to life at work, chances are you're going to be more successful and fulfilled. So those are a couple of themes which typically come up.
Interesting. I have a lot to poke on that, but let me go back to another question that we had sort of left, which is reinvention is happening across industry. Banking is now fintech. Food is food tech. Retail, of course, is now retail tech and e-commerce. Every industry is reinventing, and often it's the management and sort of worker layers that are left behind because they feel they haven't been able to keep up with the company's new direction. And often people find themselves high and dry in the middle of a very successful career. So, when is a good time to think about your personal brand?
Well, I think the best time to think about your personal brand is before you feel the need to reinvent yourself. And I'd say it's never too early, honestly. And to be honest, none of us needs to even use those words, personal branding. But I think it's really asking those questions. It's really asking questions about, hey, what am I passionate about? What are my unique skills? What's happening in the world around me that I can keep myself relevant, find the right fit? And what I realize is in the corporate world, a lot of people are hardwired to thinking of strengths and opportunity areas. That's hardwired in any organization, big or small. Every single year you sit down, you go to an interview. What are your strengths? That's part of our
Yeah.
lingo. I think what people sometimes miss is, what are you passionate about? What genuinely makes you get out of bed in the morning? People don't ask that question often enough. And the other thing people don't think about deliberately enough is, what's happening around me? What's changing? Where can I best apply my strengths and passions to make an impact, be relevant? And sometimes when people don't ask that, they chase someone else's definition of success.
Hmm.
You may be good at something, and a lot of other people like you may have a certain degree. So you assume, I'm going to do a certain job or get into a certain field because that's using my strengths. But
Hmm.
when you combine that with what you're passionate about and what's happening in the world, you might actually find something which is a fit, or you might find an emerging area where you can actually shine, which may not be what everyone else is going to. And I think the earlier you ask those questions, when you're in school, when you're making a decision of what to study at college, when you're making a decision about where to start your career, I think the earlier you start asking those questions, chances are you'll be more fulfilled through the journey.
Completely agree. I'm connecting a few things you've said so far and reflecting on how I when I do interviews, you talked about mixing, that personal and work are not separate. And the whole, and I've heard the word passion come out from you very passionately. And I resonate with that. When I interview, I often ask people, all right, what are the things that you're interested in outside of work?
Yeah,
And it turns out people are, one, very shy about it. Two, many people are not quite even interested in things outside of work. And uh, and if I'm not sensing a spark, because if you don't have a burning fire anywhere in your life, like 360
absolutely.
degrees, then perhaps that fire is not going to suddenly arrive at work, right? And of course, people from India often say movies or cricket, things I'm not passionate about. My question always is, but tell me about movies. What is it that you're passionate
Yeah,
about?
yeah,
People are shallow, haven't explored their interests. And I agree with you. People who are passionate about not just one thing but many things, because that fire
absolutely.
once lit, just burns everywhere.
Oh, you're so right. And we both grew up in India, and I came from a very solidly middle class family. I'd say we teach kids to be smart, to be competent, to be competitive. What we sometimes miss out is, we should teach them to be authentic. We should teach them to be passionate, because that's what really matters. At the end of the day, everyone's smart. None of us is an idiot. None of us is Einstein. Within a few degrees of freedom, we're all smart. We're all trying to do the best we can for ourselves and our families. I think ultimately what makes a difference is when you're being authentic to yourself, so you're finding the right fit, and when you're passionate. And for me, passion is contagious. When you engage with people and they see you engaging on any topic, whether it be work or family or a hobby, and you're just going through the motions, or you're doing stuff because you have to do it versus because you love doing it, that's what ultimately makes a difference.
Passion is absolutely contagious, and people like working with people that make their own passions come out.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
completely agree. Now, for those that are not familiar with Indian languages, the Indian construct where Amanak and I both grew up, you would gather at the tea stall and have
Yeah.
conversations. You would call that place an adda. And in Manak's book, I fell off my chair laughing because those are the words. That's the acronym he picks up. So, Manak, talk about your ADDA framework, ADDA framework, for thinking
Yeah,
about.
so I'd say first of all, Gaurav, I was laughing when I wrote it because I'm not a guy who's big on frameworks and theories and making 4x4 models. I normally laugh at stuff like that. Because I'm somebody who believes that much of learning that you get in life is by sharing stories.
Hmm.
It's by sharing your experiences with others and learning from others' experiences, and then distilling it to see, what does this mean for me? So that was kind of why I picked Adda. It's because the whole tonality is not, me being a quote unquote expert dispensing wisdom. It's more of a conversation among friends who have gathered over tea and who are chatting about stuff that's on their minds. So that
Hmm.
was kind of the tonality I wanted to set. So the Adda framework is really about the four things I think that really are critical in building a personal brand. The first, which we've talked about a bit, is really being authentic and purpose driven, which is
Hmm.
really understanding who you are, what you're passionate about, and how you bring that to life. The first D is really about being differentiated.
Hmm.
And I think this is an important thing for people, because especially when I started chatting with a lot of these young people, people tend to define their identities by the degree they have, or the business card they have, or where they're working. And that's not unimportant. That is a part of it, but people kind of stop there. And then we
Hmm.
said, look, if you're applying for a job, or if you're thinking of a change moment in your career, there are almost everybody applying for that probably has a similar degree or similar set of experiences. What actually differentiates you? And that's a core concept in branding, which is, if you're a detergent powder, of course you got to clean clothes. If you're a mobile phone, of course you have to have connectivity and make a call. But that's not how people build brands. You don't say, I'm going to sell you the latest mobile phone. Guess what? You can call your friends, right? Nobody says that.
Yeah.
You talk about things that differentiate you. And that's, I think, the second construct is thinking of, look, what actually sets me apart?
Hmm.
And that's usually quite linked to the first part, which is, who am I as a person? What are my unique passion points? And how do I bring that to life? The third one in the model, which is the second D, is delivering at the moments of truth. And again, the reason I found this interesting is that for a lot of people, when you talk of delivering, again, in the kind of broad corporate culture we're in, they think, okay, got it. Delivering means I have a target and I deliver it. Yes, but there's more to it. And that's why I kind of use the concept of moments of truth, which is something we can chat about more, but it's really about, how is a brand built? How does a consumer or a stakeholder experience a brand? And typically people talk about the zero moment of truth is, you form perceptions even before you go to a shelf or you think you need a category. In
Hmm.
the context of brands, you might be browsing on Amazon or looking up on Google. In the context of people, you're probably looking them up on LinkedIn. So you
Hmm.
form perceptions of people even before you actually come across them. So are people conscious of how they're building the social brand? The first moment of truth is when you come across people face to face in an interview, on a virtual setting, across an office meeting. And again, people are usually conditioned to saying success is, I have the answers, I know my facts. That's
Hmm.
important. The big lesson that I wanted to share with people is that there's a ton of research out there which shows it's much more about your tone, your body language, how you're generating a connection with people you're engaging with. The second moment of truth is the results you deliver. And
Hmm.
again, the important thing there is understanding expectations that
Hmm.
people have of you. And then the final A in the model is about adaptability, which I think is really critical, especially in the world we live in today, which is, you take your core passions and purpose, understand how you're differentiating yourself, but importantly, understand how the world around you is changing, understand how you are changing, and understand how you need to pivot. You
Hmm.
talked of businesses pivoting. I think it's the same for us as people. We need to continually reinvent ourselves, learn new skills. For me, as an example, last few books I've written have been about zombies, snipers, terrorists. For me, pivoting in my own mind and realizing, look, it's probably more important now for the world around me to share some of these things that I've been chatting with these people about versus writing another thriller.
Amazing, amazing. Your differentiated point reminded me of a series of interviews. We went back to our shared alma mater
Yeah,
for campus hiring, and of course, everyone looks the same on paper naturally
yeah,
because
yeah,
they're going to the best B school in India. So the question is, how are you going to eliminate people? And my co-interviewer and I, we decided to have fun. We were just the crazy guys. So we said, look, we want to see everyone, all 110 of the
yeah.
applicants, and you can't interview 110 people. So we said we'll do rapid fire, 2 minutes,
Yeah.
just bring everyone. We want to see everyone, and then we'll shortlist and call people. Our whole point was we want to sense their vibe, and so people walk in, the experience. They know what questions we're going to ask. So our question would be, okay, what makes you you? And people would say something, and then we'd say, all right, tell us a little bit more. By the 10th guy, everyone knew what the questions are going to be. So I said, all right, what questions are they telling you to prepare for? He said, well, tell me what makes you you. All right, what's your answer? And the guy said, one guy I remember, he says, well, I'm a good stand-up comic. And then, pin drop silence in the room. We're like, okay, stand up. Let's hear it.
No, that's so uncanny, because I had a very similar experience. So I went back to campus hiring after many years when I moved back to India. And I had the same feeling, which is all these smart kids, but everyone seems to be a clone of each other and no fault
Yeah.
of theirs. So I actually said, look, forget all the group discussions and all that other fancy stuff. Just shoot a video on your smartphone and answer two questions. If you were not an MBA, what would you do with your life?
Yeah.
And what's the one time you've screwed up and what did you learn from that? Because otherwise, for people, it's almost like a template, which is
Yeah.
I'm going to be asked questions and I'll have the answers. And you're right. I think the more people can think about outside those templates, the more they actually start understanding who they are beyond those labels that are stuck on them.
Yeah. And what drove us to the people we finally hired was their passion, this raw energy. It
Absolutely.
wasn't intelligence was a given, of course, they're at, this
Yeah.
B school. It was their raw energy that came through about topics that they were passionate about. One guy told us about his IKEA sourcing experience, and that was mind blowing to us. We said, look, this, and he's doing really well in his career. So you're right. It helps to have passions and be passionate and not to hide those in your conversations.
No, absolutely. I mean, the last point you mentioned is really important, is not to be apologetic about who you are. I think too often, we force people into a belief that it's about conforming. It's about, there's a certain formula for success. There's a certain mold you need to fit into. I mean, ultimately, you're going to be happiest and most fulfilled when you're you. As you said,
Hmm.
what makes you you, and being in touch with that, not being apologetic about it.
Yeah. Let's talk about myths. What are some common myths that you've seen in the context of personal branding?
Well, I think the biggest myth is, it's not me. I don't like selling myself. I don't like networking. And, that takes some doing, because it starts with saying, look, building a brand or building a personal brand is almost the opposite. It's actually going deep inside. It starts there. It's understanding who you are, what you're passionate about. And second is to say it's almost style agnostic. I mean, I personally am not an extrovert. I don't like networking. I don't party. Almost all the time I get outside of work, I try and spend with my family. So it's almost style agnostic. It is about connecting with people, but do that in a way that works for you. It's not,
Hmm.
you don't need to be the life of the party, holding center stage, being the most flashy and extroverted person in the room to build a personal brand. I think that's one myth about style. I think the second myth is that, I believe that ultimately the results do the talking. All
Hmm.
of this is all superficial. And, yes, results are important. Let's not kid ourselves. If you want to build a career anywhere, or if you want to build a business, of course you have to deliver. I mean, that goes without saying. But what people miss there is personal branding is not something you do. Even if you don't believe in personal branding, you are forming imagery in people's minds, just by
Hmm.
conversations you have, how you come across, the choices you make. So just that realization that whether you believe in it or not, whether you do it or not consciously, you are creating a brand for yourself, and which is going to determine the kind of relationships you have, kind of business uh, contacts you vibe with or don't vibe with. And if that's the case, why not be a bit more deliberate and thoughtful about it? So those are, I think, a couple of common myths that come across.
But isn't there the risk of being too much of a weirdo and then being shunned from standard corporate careers? Is that something you hear back from people?
Yeah, I do. And what I would say is, look, every single one of us almost has a toolkit of skills and strengths and passions, right? I mean, none of us is defined in a single way. And what I always tell people is, look, that's where the third part of, defining a brand purpose comes in, which is understand the environment you want to thrive in. So first of all, choose the right fit. So, you'll be less of a weirdo or an outlier if you ask that question early enough in your career to say, look, where am I going to fit? What's the vibe of the place I'm thinking of joining? Who are the people there? How does work get done? Ask those questions early enough so that you can find the right fit. And second, I think it is about adaptability. It's about flexing different muscles depending on the situation you're in. So you say that, look, how do I stay true to who I am? But at the same
Hmm.
time, building a personal brand is not a selfish pursuit of, I'm going to be myself and to hell with everyone else. It is ultimately about serving people around you. So understanding, look, how do I adapt? Because you'll work with managers or colleagues who are very different from you. And that doesn't mean they're bad or wrong. It's about having that empathy, understanding how you can adapt to different situations.
That's fascinating. So you're saying what I take away is um, personal branding is not a doing. It's not what you do. It's who you are, right?
Exactly.
And so it's a being more than it is a doing. But also, it's not about who you are for your own sake. It's who you are in the context of the service you provide to others.
Absolutely.
That is interesting. And so you're defining yourself by what you're capable of serving others with rather than,
Absolutely.
oh,
And I
this is
think,
a persona.
yeah, yeah. And I'd say, if the best personal brands are those which are on a continuing journey of expanding their sphere of service. I mean, all of us serve ourselves. That's human nature. But I
Sure.
think too many people, all their conversations are all about my career, what I aspire to do. I find these stupid questions of, what do you want to be in 5 years? And people define it as this designation, this salary. Ultimately, for us, that sphere of service needs to keep growing. The day you have a single person responsible, who you're responsible for at work, you're no longer serving yourself, you're serving them. And through that, you grow. The day you start being part of a family, which is the day you're born, your sphere of service is people around you in your family. And I think for me, ultimately, it's a journey for all of us in our own way to say, how do we keep expanding that sphere of service? And you guys are a good example of that through this, because I know we're just chatting, but there are a bunch of people listening in, and if anybody gets any thoughts, ideas, insights that helps them in even a really small way, you've served someone. And for me, ultimately, that's what good brands are all about, and that's what personal branding is all about.
Yeah, amazing. So there's a question on the chat, which is, can you share an example about how your personal brand can be something that's now superficial, or I'm assuming that means not superficial. So something that's real and not and tangible rather.
I think a good example of that is, how do you show up and how do you react at tough times? Because, it's easy to say, I have a personal brand, I'm authentic when the going is good and everything's smooth. I think really your personal brand, your purpose, your authenticity is tested when you actually hit a rough patch or you have to make tough choices. And for me, that's the core of it, because then you're really saying, look, what matters.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I think a lot of businesses and leaders have been tested over the last year as we've gone through COVID, as we've gone through all the ups and downs. I think it's been a wake up call for a lot of people to say, look, what actually is important. And I think it's when we hit times when there's a dilemma, when we have to make a choice, that we are forced to confront, who we really are, what really matters.
Yeah. Another question. You mentioned that the strongest brands come from a sense of purpose. How do I find that purpose within myself?
Well, that's a good question. And I'd say, first of all, don't even think of it as the word purpose, because, that can seem very heavy and it can seem like, oh my God, do I need to meditate? And you can, if that helps you, because ultimately it's about getting in touch with yourself. But I'd say there are maybe a few things you could think about. First is, to the conversation we were having earlier on passions. What do you enjoy doing? Ever since you were a kid, what have you had fun with? That's a good place to start. The second thing I'd say is, surround yourself with some people you can trust to keep you grounded in who you are. And that, in my case, it starts with my wife, Pooja. I have a couple of really trusted mentors, because, it's easy for, we're all human. It's easy for each one of us to get lost in, chasing something, but having some people who really know you for who you are, who are vested in your success with no selfish motive, and having conversations with them in terms of keeping you grounded on choices you make, who you are as a person, I think are important areas in which you could really start defining, to your point, what makes you you, outside of
Hmm.
the suit you wear when you step into a business meeting or the business card you have. I think those are important things that have helped me.
Yeah. Has it been helpful in your career? This is one of the questions of being an author and a storyteller. How does that help you in your career in business?
No, I've actually found that I have benefited both ways. Because if I think of it, the core of being an author is not the act of writing a book, it's really the idea of connecting with people through stories. And that for me is what we need to do as business leaders fundamentally, right? Whether
Hmm.
you're building a brand, when you're building a brand, you're fundamentally telling a story to consumers about why they should be part of your brand. If you're leading an organization, you're fundamentally creating a story about the journey you're on, where you're headed, what success looks like, why people should be along on the journey. So for me, there's a lot of parallels. And the core at the which is common to both of them is the most important decisions we make in our life are driven less by the intellect, they're driven more by what resonates emotionally. And it's true.
Hmm.
I know novel we want to read, or the movie we want to watch, or the boss we want to work with, or the kind of organization we want to work with. And I think being a novelist teaches you a lot about how to connect with people at that emotional level. And I think that's something which I've really found helpful. And I think my career as a brand builder and somebody leading businesses, I think has really taught me at its most fundamental level the most about people. And that's an amazing thing to learn when you want to be a writer, because they say one of
Hmm.
the biggest things about being a writer is how do you create characters. And I've been
Hmm.
lucky to work with people from many diverse cultures in many different parts of the world. And through that experience, you learn a lot about what drives people, their motivations, the fact that there's no good or bad people. Very usually there's a large
Hmm.
set of people who are driven by their own motivations, the diversity of styles, and that's rich fodder for creating characters. If I had just lived in one place and sitting in a room and writing books and not had that exposure to all of these wonderful people with all their diverse styles and cultures, I probably wouldn't be as good a writer.
Hmm. All right, one more question. How do you justify spending time on building your online persona and your personal brand? How do you make this a priority?
Well, I'd say first of all, be clear on why you're doing it. So, to be honest, if you're doing it only out of a sense of narcissism, don't do it. It's probably a waste of time. And a lot of people do that. That hey, I'll be on LinkedIn and I'll basically talk about the award I won and how smart I am and what I've learned, and that's great. But I think too many people think of social media as an act of narcissism, and don't do it. Honestly, you're just beating your own chest. But I'd say if we go back to what we were talking about, if building a brand, fundamentally, let's forget the fancy words, just being a decent human being who's contributing to others around them in terms of providing service, I'd say be on social media with that same spirit. Share stuff you've learned, add to the conversation in whatever subject field you're in, have a point of view on stuff that's going on around you, reach out and connect with people so that you can help them and you can be helped by them in turn. If you're doing that, then it's not an extra effort. That's the core of, I think, being human and being connected with each other. And I'd say if you approach it with that spirit, then it's just an extension of who you are. Then it's not an extra effort. You're not making an effort, quote unquote, look good on social media or project an image. For me, the most powerful social presence is one where you're just doing exactly what we talked about earlier, which is you're trying to make a positive contribution to others by connecting, by learning, by sharing points of view. That's how I would approach it.
Fantastic. We're over time today. I have more questions than I came in with. Maybe we'd love to call you back and have more questions and maybe do this Ask Me Anything on Twitter. Speaking of which, we will drop your Twitter and Instagram handle on the chat box so that people can follow you. And just tune into your daily updates that I'm seeing. Very fascinating work, by the way. Your book is Brand New Start, and it's available everywhere. I got it on mine on Kindle, and it's an amazing book. Other than that, I know you're answering questions on LinkedIn and everywhere else. So I'd encourage everyone to follow Menak on LinkedIn and ask him questions there. Menak, thank you very much for being here with us today.
Thanks so much, Gaurav. Thanks for having me over. It was wonderful chatting with you.
Have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.